You've heard it said that money is the root of all evil, but the real statement is the love of money is the root of all evil.
You are listening to Wealth Talks with Dr. Tom and John McPhee. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the difference between capitalism, socialism. We're going to talk more about that today. You'll hear more about this. And also, the love of money versus money. Is the money itself evil, or is the love of money that gets into negative territory here?
A lot of people say, well, if you pursue wealth, you're going to lose your health. And yet that overlooks the very definition of wealth, because wealth comes from the Old English word weal, W-E-L-E, which means health, well-being, and prosperity. And so pursuing wealth is not something that we should shun, because as you become wealthier, that means that if you're coming by your wealth honestly, you have done more service to other people.
And that's really the key there. How did you come by it? The three systems that you heard about a couple weeks ago on the show, you can choose from socialism, which is government redistribution of wealth. You can choose from capitalism, which is redistribution in the markets to whoever is providing service. Or you can have neo-capitalism, which is redistribution in a manipulated market. Think the mob, or even just government controls on a regular capitalistic market system that creates imbalances. It creates a manipulated market that does not, it changes the outcome. And so you really have to look, how did you get the money?
Yes, and this is a really important thing to discuss, because so many millennials today are saying that socialism is something they would prefer over capitalism. And really, I believe it's because they don't understand what true capitalism is. They've been given a picture of what neo-capitalism is, where governments have set themselves up for entrepreneurs and corporations to lobby them for special favors and basically turn corporate America into a welfare state itself.
Yeah, it becomes a huge beast.
And so they feel that that's unfair, and they want the same handouts for themselves that corporations and entrepreneurs are getting. And yet, that's not true capitalism. True capitalism really is a selfless service to others. And it's what has allowed Western society to develop and grow and really provide all the things that socialists say they want to provide but never can when it's been implemented in society.
So this, capitalism, it's not a perfect system, because there's always going to be people that come along and try to corrupt it. The neo-capitalists, who are going to come in, try to get special favors. And sometimes, as often as they succeed in getting those special favors, they're going to come out ahead monetarily, but that doesn't mean that they're more wealthy because of that.
No, because wealth has to do with your health, and health has to do with your mental, spiritual, and physical well-being.
It's a balance.
And so if someone takes advantage of someone to get their money, that's not wealth. That is just corrupt riches. That's based on greed. And so that would be the love of money. Whereas someone who's truly wealthy and generates money because of the services and the value they're providing other people is what true capitalism is. They're not looking for a government handout or a break from government or some regulation that thwarts their competition. They're looking for just how can I provide more service to other people.
Yeah. So that's obviously that's the ideal system here, the capitalist system. But what happens, what is key to that system? What's the difference between, slipping from capitalism into neo-capitalism, where everyone's getting special favors, or certain people are getting special favors at the expense of everyone else? What's the key to maintaining that, the ideal there?
Well, I think the key is, as history has shown, is a stable currency. And that's what government is supposed to provide its constituents. And yet, in 1913 in our country, they banned a stable currency and went to fiat currency with the Federal Reserve. And now we've got different countries all around the world devaluing their own currency so they can compete in a world or global market and be supposedly superior because their currency is worth less and it gives them an advantage in trade.
Yeah, so it does provide an advantage there. That's a neo-capitalist model. So you're saying stable money is a crucial component to maintaining the fairness of the capitalist system and not giving special favors to anyone?
It is. And for an example, let's go back in the English Empire to find out when it really began to grow.
Okay.
And it was when Sir Isaac Newton, who we know for his scientific endeavors, was put in charge of the mint that made the English coinage.
Monetary supply. Okay.
And before Newton was a great scientist, he was an alchemist trying to make gold out of lead and everything else.
Yep.
And he had spent many, many years studying all those principles, which made him understand that the English mint was not cooling their gold coins like they should. And so they were leaving a lot of weight in the coins that shouldn't be there. So when Newton took over, he made... he saved about 40 or about 50% of the excess that was going into those coins, and that made it really hard for goldsmiths and people that just wanted to create a capital out of exchanging currencies like's happening today between the world. What they would do is they would buy up all these English coins before Newton came on. They would melt them down, and they, knowing how to cool them properly, had excess money they could sell back to the British Mint.
Interesting.
Well, Newton put an end to that because he set up standards so that when the coins of the English government were minted, they were very, very hard to get any excess precious metals out of them.
Okay.
And so he set that up, and for the next couple of centuries, England dominated the world currency because they had a stable currency.
Yeah, so he was instrumental in setting up that gold standard. He also changed the trading rate between silver and gold as well to enforce the gold standard, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So whether currency is based on gold or not, the fact that it needs to be stable, that's an important takeaway here. You have to have a stable currency in order to maintain a fair system. Just because you have a stable currency doesn't mean the system will be fair, though. And that's where it comes to the next step in this process here. The currency trading obviously didn't create wealth for the people that were doing it. It created a lot of busy work. It created wealth for some people. But what about the greed factor that goes into capitalism?
Well, we know that certain laws like tariffs and things like that set up the World War II. After World War I, there was massive tariffs assessed against foreign governments by the U.S., by the U.S. Congress. And that made it very, very hard for people to compete with American-made goods.
Okay.
Well, the same thing happens when a country devalues its currency like China does, and there's no way to compete with that cheap labor, and then the fact that the government of China is subsidizing their current currency, so, they have to, it doesn't make it very favorable for them to buy products from the United States.
Right.
So it's very much like what was happening in England before Newton. There was a greed factor taking place. People were trying to make money for nothing, and that's what breeds wars, and that's what breeds animosity between countries. It doesn't create free trade like everyone thinks it does, because there's not a standard universal around on how governments control their own currency.
So a tariff can be a way to try and balance that out.
If it's used properly. If it's used improperly, it can create animosity and create wars.
Right.
But so can devaluing your currency, because now, in essence, when you devalue your currency, you just increase your purchasing power on the world market.
So pretty much all of the countries of the world today devalue their currency. It's not an exception whether they do it a little bit or a lot. It's just it's a case of, well, I didn't do it as much as you did, so my bad must be good.
And a lot of countries have negative currency values at this point.
Okay.
And so it's very damaging to world trade because it makes it unfair, uneven, and that's not then exchanging something of a fair value back and forth, which capitalism is based on.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other day in your blog, Dad, you quoted George Gilder, where he says, I think it was in the book Wealth and Poverty, he says, wealth is only valuable when it's combined with wisdom.
Yes, and when it's combined with greed or ignorance, it quickly dissolves into the winnings of Las Vegas or lottery, which disappears very shortly. Mm-hmm. So there has to be a balance, and government's job is to do that. That's what one of their features is to protect the currency. It's to protect their borders, and yet government gets involved in subsidizing corporations and subsidizing poor people at the expense of the middle class. Mm-hmm. And the only way to pay for those things is to raise taxes, either by messing with the value of the currency, which is called inflation, or actually raising our income taxes, our property taxes, our tax on services and goods.
Sure. Yeah, you hear tax the rich all the time, but who's the rich?
Yeah.
As you give more and more handouts, the barrier of the deciding line of who is rich, that line moves lower and lower on the scale.
And today, it's very it's a very well-known fact that most Americans pay 40% or more of what they make in taxes. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that it's income tax. It could be a tax on a piece of chewing gum, or a tax on gas.
Sure, all of those taxes added up.
Because those are hidden taxes that nobody even knows about. And when that happens, it just continues to make the poor and the wealthier wealthier.
Right, because all of those hidden taxes, those are usually imposed by businesses who had to pay the tax in the first place. They just pass it on to their customers in form of higher prices.
That's correct.
So, yeah. So pretty much every government in the world is manipulating their currency like this. This is the system we live in. We don't necessarily have a perfect, stable currency. So what is the best solution given the environment that we're in? Because most currencies are based on debt today. So it's not a stable factor there. What's the best solution?
Well, when Jesus was praying to the Father after, and he said, don't take these people out of the world, but leave them in the world and let them use the systems of the world to glorify you. Now, that's a paraphrase, but that's basically what he was saying.
Yeah, John 17.
And so we have to become wise as serpents and as innocent as doves, and use this system that we are in, because this is the environment, this is the society, this is the conditions that we have to live on. And that's why we're so excited about participating whole life insurance. It gives us a standard value that's providing a service to thousands and thousands of other people when we pay premiums, because not only are we providing for people's death benefits, we're providing capital to entrepreneurs that want to make services and products that bring value to other people. Mm-hmm. And then we get a profit from that too.
Yes.
And that's what true capitalism is all about. And it works really best with mutual companies, because now we're not siphoning off the top of that and giving it to stockholders who have no interest in this community of insureds.
Yes.
And then not only do we get to do that, then we have the opportunity to leverage against that death benefit that we've purchased and go out and be more capitalistic or entrepreneurial ourselves, and to recover debt that we're paying to other people so it can be directed back to this insurance pool that we're part of. Mm-hmm. It'll help us to create a passive income for ourselves so we're not dependent on government welfare systems or subsidies or entitlements. And it will also help us to avoid paying unnecessary taxes. including being a hedge against inflation. And that's why...
I really like that hedge against inflation, because here you're paying premium dollars into it. You do get all those dollars back over time, once the policy has been capitalized, usually somewhere between 7 and 15 years. And then as your cash values grow beyond what you've ever paid in premiums, that absolutely becomes a hedge against inflation.
It does.
And you can access your money along the way. So let's say that hyperinflation does hit and you're concerned about the value. You could go access the money from... take a policy loan from your policy there, go invest in some sort of hard asset. You don't want to operate in fear like that all the time by tying your money up into hard assets all the time. But this provides you a system where you can get you can have a hedge against inflation while it's low, and you still have a resort if it comes to hyperinflation as well.
And the other thing that we really understand about participating in whole life insurance, it's a tool that can help you become wealthier. Mm-hmm. Because we are made in the image of God, you and I and everyone else, which means that we are creative beings, which means we can take the scarcity that we have in our world and create something abundant out of it.
Sure.
We can make something out of nothing because we have that creative ability inborn in all of us, and having money makes it easier to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to do it without money. I mean, try going to the grocery store and convincing them to sell you some groceries without any money.
It is. And of course, America has been very blessed in having founding fathers that understood that we need the freedom to exercise that creative gift from God. Mm-hmm. And when that freedom is curtailed or impinged upon, the creativity goes down. It's like feeding, the story of feeding the wild hogs corn. Pretty soon the wild hogs quit foraging for themselves and creating their own food sources and they became dependent on the man feeding them, and then he was able to capture the wild hogs. Well, it's the very same thing in government. If we become too dependent on the handouts, whether we're corporations, whether we're welfare recipients on the other end of the stick, then pretty soon we lose our ability to create value. And that's exactly what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed. Everyone was so dependent on government, they really didn't know how to be productive. Mm. And so that's why Russia has struggled since the time the Soviet Union collapsed, because many people were never even entertained the thought that they could do something creative. They always depended on the government.
Interesting. So government is an obvious villain here. You have to, but we're in the system. Government does provide some good services as well, like the infrastructure and the military protection that nations need in order to be able to survive. That's crucial to protect the freedom, the creativeness of its citizens. So although the government provides some very vital functions here, it's also a villain when it moves beyond those vital functions and tries to manipulate the markets. And that's the takeaway for you today. Whenever you see government involved in manipulating the markets, recognize that it's not really a true form of market redistribution anymore. It's a manipulated form of market distribution that is going to favor some people over another, regardless of how that system is set up. There is no such thing as a fair manipulated system.
Well, in a way, it's a form of tyranny.
Absolutely.
Because, why should your goods and services be taken from you to be given to me simply because I've lobbied the right congressman or the right people on Capitol Hill to be the recipient of what they've confiscated from you?
Absolutely should not
That's
be.
wrong.
Yeah. And so when you look, you see these oversteps in the boundaries of government, then you want to look for areas to counteract that, where freedom still does allow you to do that. One of those ways is in participating whole life insurance, using that as a vehicle for your savings so it doesn't lose its purchasing power, acts like a hedge against inflation, and you can still access your money to make the good investments that do come along the way. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be the takeaway that's going to help you become wealthier, tells you also why you should become wealthier, because you'll be able to help more people in the process of doing that. And that's the takeaway for you today. If we can help you with that process, give us a call, 702-660-7000. Any last words for today?
Well, I like the founding fathers when they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that pursuit of happiness is the entrepreneurial spirit that we can create value out of nothing to make everybody, including ourselves, better off. But it depends on the fact that we have to be alive and that we have to have freedom.
That's right. Those are key components. You are listening to Wealth Talks. We talk about solutions for your prosperity. We'll be back next week.